One of the studies that we did a number of years ago was it was a large scale survey of fathers' attitudes about fathering. And what came back was that 58% of all dads believe that they could be easily replaced by another man in their child's life. We really collectively, I think, as communities, need to work hard to communicate that dads are incredibly important. There's a father factor really across the board in almost everything. It touches everything.
Mhm.
So it's huge.
Pull up a chair, set the world aside. Let's find the truth we keep trying to hide.
Welcome to Across the Table. I'm your host, James Finochio. And today we have with us Erik Vecere, who was with us before with his book that he co-authored
Yeah,
with
that's
Todd
right.
Smith,
Yeah.
Bennu, in which they have another one coming out, which I'm excited to talk to you about that. But today we have you here for a far bigger issue, something that I didn't realize how much you were involved with it, but it's the issue of fatherhood. And this was actually requested by a number of our viewers. But Erik, uh, would you want to tell us what it is that you do professionally?
Sure. Yeah. I work for the National Fatherhood Initiative, and we exist to help, increase father involvement by coming alongside human service organizations and providing them everything that they need to be more father inclusive. So we have evidence-based curriculum, we do trainings, we provide technical assistance, we do a lot of things around research and data, and really everything to try to make it easier for folks to include fathers in whatever they do, with the broader family enrichment capacity that they do. So it's a lot of diverse types of organizations that we work with.
No, I am actually been through the National Fatherhood Initiative while I was doing time at Blair County, and I found your program extremely helpful. There was a number of things um, that helped me while trying to still maintain being a dad while being locked up.
Yeah.
And so, what all organizations do you guys work with?
Well, we do work with a lot of Department of Corrections and transitional facilities around the country. We work a lot with home visiting programs, a lot of community based organizations like YMCA's, Boys and Girls Clubs, things like that. Um, we've worked with different sports leagues over the years. We work pretty much anybody who's at the nexus of fathers and families. We try to create strategic partnerships with, because we don't provide direct services to the fathers, but we work with those agencies and organizations, community leaders who do. So it's a diverse representation of different types of organizations and community leaders.
Hmm. And so, like Erik, you're not small potatoes here. So, what your position at the National Fatherhood Initiative?
Yeah, I'm Chief Partner Success Officer. So I primarily oversee all of our larger network partners around the country, which are a lot of state agencies like Department of Children and Families, Department of Public Health, Department of Justice, a lot of those broader agencies that have a lot of local implementation sites. And so, in those situations, I oversee a number of services that we provide to help them assess the father friendliness of their network partners. And then we help them create action plans as a result of taking the assessment and putting a who, what, when, so that there's actually something tangible that comes out of it,
Mm.
which is always big for me. For me, it's where the rubber hits the road is, not about the trainings and all the materials and stuff like that, but what are they doing afterwards?
Right.
After the trainings or after they become aware. I like to say it's like helping them move from inspiration to implementation. So, and they're all of the organizations are in different places along that continuum.
Mhm.
So, we have to dig a little bit deeper to figure out where they are, what they need, what they're capable of at that moment, and kind of move them through what we call like the stages of father inclusion. And so whether they're in the first stage, which is just becoming aware that fatherhood is an issue that they need to be more proactive with. Um, so there's aware, and then prepare would be the second stage, helping them get ready to move into the third phase, which is launch, like launching some formal initiative for fathers. And then there's maintain and grow. So, and they're not like super neat types of stages because people can go through or organizations can go through a stage and go back to another stage, and they're all kind of interrelated, but it helps them get their minds around it.
Mhm. Now, maybe you could share some of the statistics with us because as I was doing the research for this yesterday, actually, I have a whole ton of research, but I mean, as far as actionable, printable material and statistics, National Fatherhood Initiative was by far the most informative. Um, I mean, I love Dr. Jordan
Yeah.
Peterson. Great.
Well, I'm glad to hear that that was your
Yeah.
take on it. Yeah.
But um, really, this research really puts it into actionable terms. And like, what is the difference between having a father in the home and not having a father in the home?
Well, it makes all the difference, really. And, even at NFI, we recognize that not everybody, every child is going to be in a situation where they have an involved, responsible, committed father in their life. So there's also father figures who can step in. I mean, sometimes there's grandfathers raising grandchildren and a lot of others. So, looking at even broadening how we would define fatherhood and father involvement. Um, but certainly research shows, I mean, there's still a father absence crisis in America. We still have over, 18 million children growing up without their dad. And really, to put that into perspective, I mean, that many children would fill up New York City twice or Los Angeles four times. So,
Mm,
you know, that to me really, I think, highlights the crisis that we're facing. And also, by the way, whenever that census data that we retrieve that information from is not just biological fathers.
mhm,
That also includes step and adoptive fathers. So um, that 18.2 million is there's just no father figure really there. And so we know that when children grow up in father absent homes, that they're much more likely to experience a lot of the issues that we would be combating for healthy families.
mhm,
I mean, there's delinquency and things around teen pregnancy and low academic performance. I mean, there's a father factor really across the board in almost everything. It touches everything.
mhm.
So it's huge. It's really a huge issue that we're really um, trying to it's almost like trying to turn the Titanic around, right?
Yeah,
Because it's rooted in social norms.
yeah,
And until everybody starts coming together, within communities and sending out consistent messages of what it means to be a good dad, we're going to be spinning our wheels. And that's why we also at NFI, our model is capacity building. So even though we don't provide the direct services, we're able, like when we do a training, even if there's only 30 people that we're training to facilitate a fatherhood program, each of those 30 people are reaching thousands of dads a year. So, and then if we do multiple trainings like that throughout the course of the year, we're really looking to try to, create a groundswell really,
mhm,
and so that, we can get that tipping point and create a wildfire that, people are really going to start to embrace this as something that they need to be intentional and proactive over because when we look at like social service programs around the country that are supposedly for parents, I'll often ask them, like, before I talk about anything around father friendliness, I'll ask, how parentally balanced are your programs and services?
Hmm.
And their knee jerk reaction is usually, oh, well, we have programs for both moms and dads. But then if I were to ask them, like, if I could sit in and just do some site visits, would I see approximately 50% moms and 50% dads partaking in those?
Probably not.
That's when they look like, deer in the headlight. And they're
Hmm.
like, no, it's more like maybe 90% moms and 10% dads in most of these situations. So that's the first step for them to recognize that maybe what they've been doing hasn't really been working if they're really about parental balance, you know?
Yeah. Now, what is it about those types of programs that don't attract fathers? Like, is it that they're not being reached out to, or is it that fathers generally don't care as much as mothers? Or
It's a combination of things. And I think, one of them might be the fact that they're not really reaching out or doing things specific, but you take even the word parent and there's an issue with that and a stigma attached to that
mm,
in and of itself, because a lot of men, when they see that word parent, they tend to think it's something that's probably for mom.
mm,
And if you look at a lot of the parenting magazines, websites, curriculum out there, they really do cater a little more to the maternal side of things.
mhm.
And so helping dads understand, well, first of all, when you see that word parent, that does mean you.
Yeah.
But most
Yeah.
dads, when they see that, they don't want to be the only man in a group.
Right.
It's just not something that a lot of dads feel comfortable with. And so that's why it's really important to have father specific types of programs and services, and why a lot of organizations are now running like our 24/7 dad program or Inside Out Dad program, which is for
Mhm.
incarcerated fathers. Because then the dads know, hey, this is for me, you
Right.
know,
Right.
and you deal with things that you don't typically talk about in general parenting programs. And you have to, first of all, create a safe zone
Hmm.
among men where we feel comfortable opening up, but also the topics themselves, things around family origin and what does it mean to be a man?
Yeah.
Where are we defining and what are we defining? Uh, the whole idea of manhood, um, handling, expressing emotions, men's health, uh, you know, communication. There's a lot of things that we typically as men, uh, even if they are maybe universal themes that moms might be talking about as well, the way that we would talk about it or how we would unpack, like, for example, handling and expressing feelings. A lot of men have had an issue dealing with grief and loss. And
Hmm.
that's usually what fuels like the anger and some of the other unhealthy behaviors and emotions. So, those are things that I think as you eliminate those barriers, um, more fathers would be more open to connecting with programs and services if they felt like it was more for them.
Yeah. I tell you what, it was interesting because you're in, well, in that case, in Blair County, it was jail. But still, you have a bunch of tough guys that are all sitting around talking about their kids. And it's amazing how once you get a bunch of tough guys talking about their kids, they're not so tough anymore.
No. And one of the things that we've seen in that program it, around grief and loss is that a lot of men have never grieved the loss of their own father, because
Mhm.
a majority of the dads who are incarcerated never really had a dad involved in their own life.
I think it was like 85%.
Yeah, exactly. And there are, in fact, I did a site visit one time over in one of the correctional facilities in Ohio, and there were three generations in the
Mm.
same pod,
I've seen that a lot.
the grandfather, the dad, and the son. And, it just shows that it can be very difficult to break that cycle of incarceration and father absence and why it's so important. But what we've seen is that, and especially in correctional facilities, fatherhood becomes a motivational engine for these men to turn their lives around because, as you know, when you transition out, it's brutal. I
Mhm.
mean, you can hardly get a driver's license. You need a driver's license to get a job, and you can't get a. It's just like this never-ending cycle of challenges. And but what happens is that when men understand that they provide a unique and irreplaceable role in their children's lives, that becomes that motivation for them to say, okay, well, let me figure this out, like one hurdle at a time. And we have countless stories of dads who have gone through the program and have turned their lives around. And was one piece of a larger intervention, but a big piece that they often mention.
I know for me, it definitely gave me tools to work with when I got out. Like, I always loved my son. I always had him. Um, but then when I got incarcerated, like seeing him behind between glass, it wasn't good for either of us. And I'm
No, I
sitting
bet.
there trying not to cry.
I bet.
And I was like, oh my God, I can't have this ever happen again. But it did get me involved with like the Kids First program over there.
Mhm,
I think that's probably who you guys worked through, if I remember correctly, with BCP.
mhm.
And they stayed involved even after I got out, making sure I had um, help in any way that I
Yeah.
could be helped.
That's wonderful because, that's the most vulnerable time
Mhm,
whenever, that pre-release into post-release time, the reentry phase, is critical. And, one of the other cool things that, we've actually received some research from some of the DOCs, the state DOCs, is that, they've seen a dramatic decrease in recidivism,
mhm,
for dads who have gone through Inside Out Dad versus dads who haven't.
mhm.
But not only that, but they've also seen them in Kentucky DOC, for example, they saw an 89% reduction in disciplinary infractions within the facilities.
Right.
And I'm like, that's huge, because that's a big piece of the equation for these correctional facilities is how to keep the the inmates safe
Yeah.
and in a place where they at least are open to some of the other rehabilitative services. So that was eye opening for me to see where, again, rubber hits the road
Yeah.
is recidivism is huge.
It
you
is.
know
When I was in state prison, recidivism was I would say at least 95%.
is that right? That
Yeah.
high? Yeah, I think on average across the country, when you look at like the totality of it, I think it is typically around 80-85%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and of course some are higher and lower, but that's the average.
I think it's gotten better since like last time I was there was like 2002. So, but I guess it has gotten a little better. I don't know. I try to keep my butt out of those things anymore. I'd rather just
Yeah, that's
be
good.
with
That's
the kids. Now, so we talked a little about the bad things when fathers aren't present. What are the good things that happen when a father's present?
Well, yeah, it's really the other side of the coin of everything. I mean, we see higher academic, pro-social behavior. You see, less issues with addiction. Um, better mental health. In fact, there's a whole litany of things that they call the five protective factors for children,
Mm,
and fatherhood is a major part of all those protective factors.
mm,
You know, so it is. It is really the lifeblood, and not to elevate fatherhood over motherhood, because children involve
both.
responsible and committed moms and dads
Mm,
working together in the best interest of their children. Um, it's just that what we see most frequently of the two parents is that typically dads become the distant father that then becomes the absent father over time if the relationship between him and the mom is disintegrated.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's just more um, resources that are needed, I think, to help the dads in those situations to remember, they do provide that unique and irreplaceable role in the life of their children. And that just reminded me of one of the studies that we did a number of years ago. It was a large scale survey of fathers' attitudes about fathering, and what came back was that 58% of all dads believe that they could be easily replaced by another man in their child's life. So there's like,
My
majority of
God,
the
that's a crazy
dads
statistic.
are walking around thinking they're nice but not necessary in
Yeah.
their children's lives. And what does that do? I mean, that goes right to the motivation where they're like, well, if somebody else can fill in, maybe I don't need to work on my fathering
Mhm.
skills, or I don't need to figure out, you know, how I can be more nurturing in my relationships with my children because, somebody else could step in there. And so this replaceability factor is huge. And we really collectively, I think, as communities, need to work hard to communicate that dads are incredibly important, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, wow. What is the root of 58% of men feeling like they're replaceable as fathers?
But we do a lot. I think we do a lot better job of preparing our girls and young women to be moms than we do our young men to be dads. And sometimes it's baked in culturally. Usually, uh, you think about babysitting, for
Right.
example. That's typically something that a lot of girls do, and it kind of helps them understand, this idea of nurturing and even, I mean, there's been studies about how boys play versus how girls play, and so there's there's a lot of um, I think cultural and social things that kind of play into it early on. But ultimately, um, and as you know, I mean, we men, we don't typically avoid things that we don't feel we're competent with or at,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so if we don't feel like we can be competent parents, which is not the case, of
Mhm.
course, but sometimes that can create these barriers in men's minds that, you know, I don't know if this is really something that, I could be good at.
Right.
But and one of the other things in both Inside Out Dad and 24/7 Dad programs that many of the fathers will tell us was so helpful were the sessions on the ages and stages of child development.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because and there was the charts in the back of the fathering
Mhm.
handbooks that the dads get, that for it's basically for every age and stage from the time they're born even into young adulthood.
Mhm.
And there are things listed in there about like developmentally where your child should be roughly in those ages and stages, but there's also suggestions on age appropriate ways you can get involved with your children
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
those stages. And I know that was really helpful for me, in my fatherhood journey, and just understanding, like, in fact, one time I remember my oldest daughter, and this was before I started working at NFI, but I thought she was just being defiant and stubborn about something. I was getting really frustrated.
Uh-huh.
Well, it wasn't until after I started at NFI and my younger daughter came along that I looked at those ages and stages charts, and I thought it really kicked that into my mind that she wasn't even developmentally able to do some of these things that I was expecting her to do. So she wasn't being defiant. She just wasn't in that age or stage that aligned with what I thought she should be doing. So with my youngest daughter, that it really helped relieve a lot of that friction and tension and anger sometimes,
Mhm.
that allowed me to just be a better dad.
Mhm. I find it quite different. Like raising my son who's about to be 22 is quite different than raising my daughter who just turned 11.
Yes.
It is monumentally different.
Hmm.
Now, my son, he knew I'd give him a little biff upside the head. Like, what are you doing, boy?
Yeah.
Now, my daughter, I do that. She'll break down emotionally. Like, she will just be a wreck,
Yeah.
So I don't really deal with her like that. But I know I find myself getting frustrated,
Hmm.
and then I have to go back and look, okay, well, she's responding to things that I'm doing. And I didn't realize that. And then, well, fortunately, my wife is like, she stays on those age things.
Hmm.
Okay, this is what should be happening now. She worked with like Waldorf homeschooling and
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
like that.
Okay.
So she's like, "Well, James, this is what's going on with a little girl who's 11." And I'm like,
Yeah,
"Oh, okay."
exactly. And they're so different. I mean, my two biological daughters are 6 years apart. Um, but as far as like uh what worked for one, just throw it out the window
Yeah.
because what worked for one was like uh devastating to the other and vice versa,
Uh,
and so I often think about that even when they're brought up in the same environment.
mhm,
They've already got a bent towards a personality or something that is going to affect them differently. So we always have to adjust our parenting for that.
mhm.
But a lot of guys don't, they don't feel like they have the efficacy to do that. And to be fair, again, we've never really been taught.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
where are we supposed to pick up this stuff, right?
mhm. And that's a yeah, yeah. I know up until then, up until I did that program, I had never been like even at church and stuff. They don't really give you the tools to bring you to a place of understanding
Hmm.
of like culturally where we are and like not having a father in the home. It's kind of like kind of a given that you should just be there.
Hmm.
But you have uh, like let's just take drugs for instance. How many parents have died, and you have maybe mom's not there or dad's not there, or now I know there's a big thing with grandparents taking care of the kids because both the parents are dead from overdosing. And so it all changes dynamics so fast. And it's good to have tools
Yeah.
like you guys provided. Like I couldn't believe, like I'll just show you guys. It just took me, it was one click and I found these printable sheets that were easily accessible. And there's a lot of free information
Hmm.
on the
Yeah, we
site.
actually have more free information, guides, resources than we do on our online store.
Yeah.
And we really try to keep that in that balance.
Mm,
That we, no matter where somebody is in terms of like if maybe they're in a community and there are no fatherhood programs
mhm,
and they want to figure out how to start one. We have a guide in there. They can download the guide and everything that we've learned, since like 1994 when we were founded,
mhm,
is basically condensed into that in a very easy to follow guide. But there's a guide for just about anything you can imagine
mhm.
on there.
Um, so what are the factors that predict the father's involvement in the lives? Because people get divorced, people separate.
Yeah.
What's the factors like? I know when I divorced my son's or my mom's son divorced me. I felt like a total failure. I was like, this isn't who I'm supposed to be. Honestly, I went on an alcoholic rage for a while because I felt like I just destroyed my whole family because it was mostly my fault. So, um, What is it? What are the factors that predict? Because I was very much a part of my son's life after that. I think it
Mhm.
took me about 2 or 3 months to get my shit together, but
Okay. Yeah.
once I did, I was there.
Mhm.
You know, so what are the factors that play into that?
Well, I mean, probably one of the biggest ones is the relationship with the mom,
Yeah,
because moms can be the gatekeeper
yeah,
or they can be the gateway.
yeah.
And so, um, that is really a major dynamic in terms of a dad's ability, and sometimes connected to the motivation of him staying involved in his child's life in situations like that. And I went through similar situation as well, but I ended up becoming a single dad with my youngest daughter
Mhm.
for a number of years. And so that was a whole nother experience with her going through from like 15 into her young adulthood,
Oh dear.
dating years and all of that. I mean, that took about probably 8 years off my life.
Oh yeah.
But fortunately, we navigated that, and she came out on the other side of that, well. So, but I think that that relationship with the mom and understanding, like, in those situations, but even in healthy marriages as
Mhm.
well. I mean, um, we actually have a program for moms called Mama's Gateway. So I was fortunate to you know uh, kind of work and help develop that module. And Dr. Marsha Pruitt, who is considered an expert on maternal gatekeeping, has done a lot of research around it and said even in healthy marriages, there can be gatekeeping tendencies. In
Mm.
other words, moms who don't either consciously or unconsciously, in some cases, are putting up barriers that are preventing dads from being as involved in their child's lives as they could be. So that's big. So
Could you
yeah,
give me an example of that?
of
Of moms putting up barriers to keep dad even within a marriage relationship.
well, sometimes it can come down to even parenting roles.
Uh-huh.
Like sometimes moms um, might feel like that's their familial role, is to be the primary parent. And so there's sometimes it's in the day in day out, like if the child is younger, infants or toddlers, that sometimes it can be barriers around what she will allow him to be involved with, right? And
Right.
sometimes those nurturing activities are times that dads can bond with their children as well. So that would be um one example of um maybe having a dad a little bit more on the peripheral rather than
Mhm.
really being in the trenches.
Right.
You know what I mean? But yeah, that relationship with mom is central to predicting the involvement, the level of involvement. There's a lot of research around that, especially in early childhood education
Mhm.
research, that actually mom's perception about his role as a dad is actually more important than his own perception of being a dad.
Mm.
So moms have a powerful um, element in encouraging him in his role as a father, and also sometimes stepping back, even though we might not always be doing things as well as the mom or the way that she would do it. Just remembering that it's not necessarily better or worse, but different. Like, we have
Right.
a different way of going about things on average than moms do. We have different parenting styles. Our personalities are different. So, but guess what? That all benefits the child developmentally.
Mhm.
So yeah.
To me, it's the yin and the yang because you have the feminine nurturing side.
Hmm.
Generally, women are way more nurturing than we are, and the man is generally the protector and provider,
Hmm.
and like the rock, whereas mom can be more emotional.
Well, yeah, and also there's data out there that shows on average when dads um, are allowing their children to do something novel for the first time. So, like, for example, if they're at a playground,
Yeah.
right? Younger kids are at a playground. The research shows that the dads are actually 3 times further away than the moms.
Yeah.
And so developmentally, um, children learn from both of those. Same thing like with the way dads hold children, especially infants.
Mhm.
Like moms oftentimes hold it, 10 out of 10 times the same way, like very nurturing towards the
Mhm.
body. But dads have like 10 out of 10 times they're in different positions. They got the
Mhm.
football hold, they got, out facing out towards the
Yeah.
world. They do, nurturing sometimes as
Yeah.
well. But children learn different things from those two different styles of parenting. And so I just think it's fascinating, and it's not across the board, but on average, that's what the research shows. So
That's what I heard, this thing of it's about letting kids do dangerous things carefully.
yeah, exactly.
That's a dad all day.
Yeah, well, also, it showed that, moms typically, when they're playing with their children, they like to use external objects to play with,
Uh-huh.
but with dads, he is the
The object,
yeah, like, they're
the rough
crawling all
house and
over him and playing around, and, we typically love that stuff, but, it's funny to see.
Yeah, that's what, well, my one-year-old, she's like 15 or 16 months now, but, She she comes in with her bottle and she just reminds me of like a baby cub, whether it's a tiger cub or a bear cub, and she's just rolling all over me, smacking me and
Yep,
this and that, and
yeah.
I'm just kinda laying there like,
Yeah,
yeah, oh my gosh. Um, and then, like, okay, there's also the thing of being a step parent, like, or
mhm,
stepdad, which is slightly different, I think, than being their dad.
mhm.
Uh, you have stepkids also.
I do, yeah.
So how do you define the role of a stepdad, and like what are his roles the same or slightly different depending on the situation?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it does depend on the situation, whether the children are, living with the stepchildren are living with him or not, or what the situation
Mhm.
is there. But, I always try to approach it as though I am not replacing your biological dad.
Right.
Um, but that I'm here for you, and certainly, in that role as a father figure.
Mhm.
Um, but just for the very reasons we talked about before, about 58% of dads walking around thinking that they can be easily replaced.
Mhm.
Um, I try to practice what I preach with that, you
Mhm.
know, and also depends on, the motivation of the dad, the biological dad, to want to be involved or
Right.
not, and the proximity. Sometimes they're not even living in the same town. There might be, limited access for whatever reason. But I think it is important um, to not be in a mindset that, you're replacing the biological father. And,
Mhm.
that's always in my opinion, there's always chance for, even in the most challenging situations or relationships, for reconciliation.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's the adult child that reaches out to the biological father at some point, or vice versa. But it is something that I think we should always leave that door open
Mhm.
for, and not, you know, inhibit that in any way. So, and it's a tight wire to walk sometimes. But I think also communication is really important
Mhm.
among, um, the stepdad and the mom and the biological dad. And, you know, just like with anything, I think that's the lifeblood to
Yeah.
healthy relationships, or as healthy situations as we can foster.
Mhm. 'Cause that's a like, wow, I can only go from my own experience, but like, before Katie and I were together, I raised my other stepdaughter for since she was like 8, and her dad died of an overdose. And she obviously was old enough to remember it,
Mhm.
because I think he died when she was like 7.
Mm.
But, well, they both remembered it. There was 2 children involved. But, and now she still comes over to see me, but she hated me from the time she was 11 till, about 15, and then once she got to be, well, she's 19 now, she's like, "Oh, now I understand what you were talking about."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, I know."
Well,
But
and I think you bring up a really good point there because one of the other important elements of, I think, being as good a stepdad as you can is being patient
mm,
and allowing the process to kinda unfold naturally and not trying to force things too soon because there's a lot of emotions,
yeah,
from, the children's perspective, and it also depends on the age in which you become the stepdad.
mhm,
If they're young, like you said, you had some years in there,
mhm,
um, but, sometimes you can come into it, like, in my situation more, you know, um, my wife Robin's daughters are, they're grown,
right,
by the time I became the stepdad. So,
right.
that's a little different dynamic than
Yes,
coming in when they're younger. And I think we just have to assess all of that
mhm,
whenever we're moving through it, and just try to, be as encouraging as we can, and loving as we can, but not trying to force too much too soon
mhm,
because I think that can cause a lot of friction,
yeah. Well,
even resentment.
yeah. I know. Well, we definitely weren't letting her go with 18-year-old boys at 12, even though she tried to run out the door. Oh man, that was, yeah, she was a little wild thing. And she's not even 5 foot tall, I don't think. She says she
Is
is,
that
but I
right?
don't think she is. But like, we have a different dynamic, whereas my wife's daughter, her dad's very much involved in her life. So it's different, but at least, him and I talk, but eh, unless we have a real big issue to deal with, we don't
Mhm.
really need to talk to each other that much. I mean, we say hi, we're nice,
Right.
but you know, things come up, we have each other's phone number. You know, oh, like there was like they call it someone special dance, and his daughter, she's almost about to be 12, and she's like, "Oh, I'm not even gonna ask my dad. I don't even think he's gonna come." So I text him. I'm like, "Hey, Luke, I'm pretty sure your daughter wants you to come to the
Yeah.
someone
Yeah.
special dance."
Oh, well, that's great. See,
And he
that's a
did.
great way to,
Yeah,
foster that
yeah,
relationship in there because you could have gone the other route,
yeah, and been like, "I ain't saying nothing to him."
Yeah.
Yeah, no, be like, "Yeah, you're right. He don't want to go."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, oh man. Um, Now, why I um, I'm obviously stealing from your section. I couldn't help it. It
Hey,
was
that's
so
what it's
good.
there for. I
I
would
was like,
hope
"Man, what a
everybody would
guide. Why
take advantage.
why don't I just use this guide for my question?" Um, why is it that involved dads are good for moms?
That's another really cool dynamic that, um, is helpful working in a lot of, human service organizations that
Mhm,
have a focus on, like, maternal health.
mhm,
And, understanding like when, a dad is involved around the, perinatal time, around the birth of the child, that, moms are more likely to breastfeed, less likely to have, postpartum depression. There's just so many dynamics, that an involved dad provides, for mom's health as well.
mhm.
And if you think about it, like if dad is being a better dad and you know supporting her in that, that's just going to alleviate a lot of stress for her.
Mhm,
Because moms also state that they feel less stressed when
mhm.
dad is more involved. Um, and so there are so many elements to it. And again, we're interrelated, as
Right.
human beings,
Yeah.
but especially when you share a child with someone,
Mhm,
or if that is just something that you can't fully understand. I remember, like, when I became a dad for the first time, it felt surreal. You know what I mean? It was
I
like
totally agree with you.
I could not, uh, picture myself as a dad. Like, I had a good relationship with my dad, and it was always like this external thing that, but to be, like, trying to process, "Wait, like, I'm a dad now."
Mhm,
It blew my mind.
mhm,
So, when you think about, um, that in relation to, supporting mom, and you're coming to your own grips, but also understanding what she's going through, yeah, I think it just, it just helps her process things as well, and feel supported through that. But yeah, there are all kind of really cool, uh, research, studies around that,
mhm,
how, when dad is involved, mom benefits as well.
mhm. I know this is, just having the baby not that long ago. It's amazing how much more you appreciate things at 50, I'm sure you'd agree.
Yeah,
It's just like, "Oh my gosh," and then I was able to be laid off, and then I've been laid off a lot the past year. So, um, yeah, I actually am totally glad because what better way to get paid than with a little baby that just loves you to death because she sees you all the time. And
absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
amazing how much different my connection is with her than my other kids who I was always on the road working, always away, or working a million hours. So if they saw me by the time I got home, I was just grumpy and
Yeah.
mad and just ready to drink beer and what do you want, kid?
Hmm.
you know, but I mean, I wasn't always like that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so much different to just be at home and helping raise the kids and helping do things that are you normally a guy doesn't get to do.
Right. And now, dads are actually more open to shared parenting, and I think
Yeah.
moms are too.
Mhm.
When I was, looking into some research of just more broadly speaking about, um, father involvement, it's kind of like, Tale of Two Cities. It's like the best of times, it's the worst of times,
Yeah.
because, as I was digging into it, it seemed like, for dads who are involved in their child's life, dads have never been more involved. Like,
Yeah.
they're involved in everything. But in situations where, dads are not involved, it it's worse than ever on that side too,
Mhm.
because they're just completely absent.
Yeah.
They're not engaged at all. And so, I think that, trying to find a way to, begin shifting those trends so that it's not such a dichotomy,
Right.
but everybody is kind of understanding and supporting the valuable role that dads play in everyday nurturing of the children, and, all that goes with it.
Mhm. And like, yeah. Yeah, just learning as you get older, you're like, "Wow, okay." It makes a lot of difference if husband and wife are working in tandem together also, I
Yeah.
think. At least that's been my experience, is like this time, um, being married and having kids, we work very, very closely together and how things are gonna work out.
Hmm.
And like, yeah, we make mistakes all the time, but at least we make them together and we try to figure them
Yeah.
out
I
together.
mean, that's another good point, that things have shifted culturally.
Yeah.
I know, like, when I was growing up, my mom and dad's roles were much more rigid and set.
Yes.
My dad worked out of the house, my mom was in the house, and
Mm.
did more of the housekeeping stuff. And, you know,
Had one car.
yeah, I mean, now, that shared parenting is, I mean, it's a necessity. And so, I think that that's also helped fathers in some ways,
Mhm.
because if mom's at work, and dad's got to fill in there. And he's not a babysitter. Because sometimes I've heard them
Yeah.
say, "Oh, are you babysitting tonight?" No,
No,
this is
I
my
am
child.
tossing the kids around.
Exactly.
We're gonna have so much fun now that mom's not here.
Yeah, here we go.
Who said cake and ice cream? Want some soda? well, that was interesting too. Is that had about why being an involved dad is good for the dads themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits, for the dads as they go through and get involved with their children. And also, I mean, ultimately, it does help us see there is something bigger than ourselves
Mhm.
to live for, and that just creates an outflowing of a lot healthier decisions and behaviors and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, and I know, I think a lot of dads kinda settle down a little bit, after they
Yeah.
have their children.
Yeah.
Whereas before, sometimes it can be night and day. Not everybody,
Right.
like so. But yeah, typically, dads will make wiser choices. They'll be, thinking about long term stability, things that also that reminds me too. I know a lot of dads will look at providing financially as the be all and end all for
Yeah.
how they measure being a
I was
dad.
absolutely one of those.
But, what we try to educate dads on, in particular, through a lot of our curriculum and stuff, is that while providing financially is important, it's only one of 3 legs that hold up the stool.
Yeah.
There's provide, but then there's also nurturing and guiding.
Mhm.
And so when dads learn about that, it really releases a lot of pressure because in those inevitable stages where we're either unemployed or underemployed, sometimes dads really feel like they're not valuable,
Yeah.
in their child's life or to their family, which is not the case. There's still things that dads can do to be involved, nurturing and guiding their children, even if they're struggling to provide financially. So, you know, it is about broadening that definition of what it means to be a dad.
It's amazing how much just spending time with your kids, how much it changes the way that they see you and
Yeah.
just playing with them. It doesn't cost money to do that. Or playing a board game with them.
Right.
It's
Yeah. I
just
mean,
night and day.
I think it does help, mental health.
Mhm.
I think there's physical elements to it as well,
Mhm.
especially if you're active with your kids and doing things with them. So, and remember too, it's all about role modeling,
Yeah.
you know, like they're watching everything that we do. It's not necessarily what we say, unless there's, you know,
Because
a
they rarely
disconnect.
listen to what you say.
Yeah. But they're watching. They are watching.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of that song, "Dad, I'm watching you."
Yeah.
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 Yeah. He spills his fires fries on the floor.
That's right.
Said, "Shit."
Yeah. That's right. They will pick up on it.
Yes. Oh, and, that's no one's a perfect parent, and I don't want anyone listening to this to think
Mm,
that any of us think we're a perfect parent because that's just not possible. You're gonna make mistakes. You're absolutely gonna make mistakes, but I would say it's how you figure out, what's best for you and your family
yeah.
going forward to correct the mistake, but also acknowledge that you made it.
Right. Take accountability, but don't beat yourself up over it. Sometimes, I think probably most of the time we're our own worst enemy and we come down really hard on ourselves. So I have to remind myself too, when I look back on some of the mistakes that I've made
Mhm.
as a dad, and just remember that, I mean, I was really trying to do the best I could with what I knew at the time.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and that's somewhat freeing, uh, because we can beat ourselves up to the point where, you know, we're just a shell of ourselves, because we have so many regrets and things like that. But also, I'm really fortunate that my girls are resilient because they've been through some stuff. We've all been through some stuff collectively as a family, and you know to see them thriving on the other end. My youngest daughter is actually a tattoo artist in Pittsburgh,
Oh, wow.
and my oldest is she is she's a music therapist, and she's kind of combined her love for music and helping people
Mhm.
with that, help them through different challenges that they're facing. But to see them come out, and we have the luxury now of a rear view mirror. We can
Yeah.
kind of look but we also, in the present, we can kind of assess, okay, yeah, we made some mistakes, but, you know, fortunately, they bounce back from some of that.
Yeah.
Not that you ever get over some of the, trauma, but certainly to see them on the other side and do them well, is it's does the heart good.
Yeah. I would, to go back to something earlier, I think his name is Dr. Mattis. Matei, maybe it's Matei. I forget. Don't quote me on this. But he made an interesting point when it comes to parenting. He's like, every one of your children meets a different version of you than your first child did. And so
Oh,
you are interacting with them differently than you did your first child because they're getting a different version of you. And I was like, hmm, that really gave
no,
me
that's profound.
it is. Cause I was like,
That's
wow,
really true.
you're not kidding.
Yeah, and I remember, meeting an author of a book called, I think it was called Becoming Fathers Becoming Fathers or something like that, and it's just this idea of how, you know, um, we're learning as much from them as we are imparting on them throughout this different
Mhm.
seasons of
Yeah.
life, you
Yeah.
know? They might not fully recognize it or be doing anything intentionally, but through them, we learn a lot
Mhm.
of things that I think, if embraced in the right way, can really, help us make wiser choices in the future. So,
Um, one other thing, I know you guys don't really necessarily deal with this, but I know that I've had requests for it, like I told you before we started, um, about um, resources for fathers in regards to their rights, because I know a lot of dads that just don't feel like they have rights and that the courts are going to side with moms regardless, and that is not true.
right.
Um, I are those resources, are they on the NFI website?
We do have one, while we don't, provide those types of services, we
Right.
do have, one referral in particular that's been really helpful for fathers. It's called
Mhm.
Parent Help,
Uh,
and, you can get that information off of our website if, you're dealing with things around rights and responsibilities, and also recognizing, like, every state has some nuances,
yes.
but
Yes.
in most states, a lot of dads don't understand or are aware that child support and their access to their children are two disconnected things. So even if
Correct.
they're having issues with child support and different, um, whether it's payments or whatever it might be, that doesn't necessarily mean or preclude that they still can't have access and visitation with their children.
Mhm.
So that's usually a big one with that. And we do partner with a lot of like child support agencies,
Mhm.
and there are some good fathers' rights groups as well. I know that there's one up actually in Chicago. There's a lawyer up there that does a lot of really good work with dads who are trying to navigate the legal system and
Mhm.
things like that. But yeah, and then there's things around paternity, and sometimes dads don't understand that uh, if they didn't sign the birth certificate, how does that work? Do
Oh,
I,
yeah, that's a good
that's
one. Yeah.
because there are situations where dads don't even know.
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
there really truly are.
so
A lot
they
more
may
than people would think.
and they may find out years later,
Mhm.
um, or suspect, and then have a paternity test or whatever. But there's a lot of y- you know challenging dynamics in some of these things. And again, they're all very situational, but we do have some resources, mainly through like referrals,
Mhm.
that we could connect dads to if they're dealing with things around rights and responsibilities. In we have our 24/7 dad program is 12 2-hour sessions that dads go through, but then we also have what's called a booster session for non-custodial dads, and it's another 5 sessions that sometimes facilitators will add to the 12,
Mhm.
and they deal with there's a whole session on rights and responsibilities. There's one on child support. There's one on like work readiness and things that oftentimes non-residential or non-custodial dads are wrestling with to try to be the best dads that they can be.
And that's what I would definitely like to encourage mothers to work with dads. Work with dads. Dads try to be good dads, but moms need to also work
Mhm.
with the dads because it takes two to tango,
Yeah.
and it's for the benefit of your children because it works so much better when it can work that way. Um,
It's so true, and that's one reason that we have a couple of programs for moms. One
mhm,
is called Understanding Dad,
yeah.
and so the first half of that is helping moms assess and take a look at what was the relationship like between her and her own father, and how might that be affecting the relationship between her and the father of her children. What did her mom model in the home in terms of the relationship, with her father and maybe with other men?
Mhm,
What did that look like? And how might that be affecting the lens that she's looking through in her own relationship? And then the second half of that curriculum is what I like to call how to speak dad. It's basically on effective and safe communication with the dad. Um, because just like we talked about different parenting styles, there can be a divide between how we communicate with each other too. And so I had the benefit of sitting in on some focus groups that uh, involve moms who had gone through understanding dad, and it was amazing. Like so many of them were saying, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was doing things to keep keep him, from being as good of a dad as he could be, or I didn't realize how important his role was in
mhm.
the well-being of our children." And, many of them, as they became aware, and started applying, like, those communication skills, really improved their co-parenting relationships. And so, it just shows that, yeah, I mean, it's not that moms are, in some cases, resisting it, but they just might not be aware.
What was it, G.I. Joe said? "Knowing is half the battle."
Yeah. It is, it really is. I mean, we don't know what we don't know.
Yep,
And, I mean, I think that's one of the things that, I've learned, over the years is, sometimes a whole new door will open up because now I'm like, wow, that just kind of blew my paradigm on this whole topic,
mhm,
and it can change you.
yeah. I know it definitely helped me, and that's why I was so excited that you were willing to come back on to talk with me about this because it's such an important matter. Like, we have to start doing something before we end up with nothing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, where can people go to get this information?
Our website is just fatherhood.org.
Fatherhood.org.
Yep, they
Great.
can go there, they can find the free infographics, there's, free data research, there's, guides on all different, um, topics, on how to engage fathers in your community, or, if you are running programs and services, I encourage you to take a look at ways you can, be more father inclusive in those things that you're doing. But fatherhood.org is the best place to, check out what we're doing.
And then there's also information in there if anyone's interested about, opening up something to help fathers in the area.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guide in there on, how to effectively start a fatherhood program in your community.
Mhm,
We have one that's more, I would call it more of a micro thing where,
mhm.
or macro, where instead of looking at like one or two programs, how can you mobilize your entire city or county around
Okay.
responsible fatherhood? And we have something that's called our community mobilization approach. It's a three-phase process. We've done this in so many cities and counties across the country now. And as a result, there have been a number of citywide and countywide fatherhood initiatives that
Mhm.
have come out of it, and that it's really exciting to see. I just finished up one in Baytown, Texas, in the Houston area, and then one in Harrisonburg, Rockingham, Virginia. And yeah, it's just when you see an entire community coming around it and doing stuff in all the different sectors of
Hmm.
that community, that's really exciting because that's getting at those social norms that every sector in the community's got to be sending those same messages that fathers matter.
Is there anything like that in Altoona?
I'm not aware of a specific fatherhood initiative, but I know that we have worked with like local home visiting programs um, to help them be more father inclusive in their home visits.
Mhm.
So there are some organizations and agencies that are doing things to try to include more fathers and be more father friendly. But certainly an area I think where we could do a lot more.
I agree. We'll have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on, giving us information, and letting everybody know where they can go to find some free help. And yeah, be a good dad. Kids need you. All right. Peace out. My team and I know how valuable your time is, so we wanted to thank you for making Across the Table part of your day. By liking, sharing, and subscribing, you help keep us inspired and motivated to continue creating content for all of our listeners. If you have ideas for the show or would like to be a guest, please contact me via email at james@acrossthetablepodcast.com. That's james@acrossthetablepodcast.com. Thank you.
Pull up a chair, set the world aside. Let's find the truth, we keep trying.